They are decidedly out of touch with where the electorate is. They're interested in making their money and leaving. Whether or not they make whether that they produce victory is never an issue, right? It's
right.
240 million on TV ads with at least a 20% kickback on placement means those who made the ads and placed the ads made a cool 48 million at least.
Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up. Hey there, it's Jordan. I am delighted to be joined by James Zogby, president of the Arab American Institute and a long-suffering member of the Democratic National Convention. What is it, over 30 years you've been with the DNC?
Yes, 32 now.
Oh, boy. So obviously a lot to discuss, but I'm sure you have seen these strategic leaks that insiders at the DNC have been making to friendly outlets like Politico. This was a recent article, Centrist Dem sees opening at the DNC. I don't want to be the freak show party, was the headline. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but essentially they say the party is too woke. That's why they say they lost to Donald Trump. Here's a quote from Joseph Paulino, committeeman from Rhode Island. The progressive wing of the party has to recognize, we all have to recognize the country's not progressive and not too far to the left or too far to the right. Before we get into the mechanics of the DNC, you've been there for a while. In 2016, it was Russia they were blaming, and now it seems a lot of the folks at the DNC seem to be focusing on wokeism as the reason they lost to Donald Trump again.
Because you have that stacked on top of what happened on college campuses this fall, stacked on top of what's been happening on college campuses over the past 4 or 5 years. I have said this on the air. And every time I've said it, people said, oh, you're just saying that because you're a white conservative. No, I'm just saying it because every Democrat that we have ever sat down with dinner with over the past 5 years who have kids that go to colleges say their kids are afraid to speak in class because they'll be canceled.
We're so worried about alienating one or another cohort in our coalition that we don't know what to say when normal people look at that and say, wait a second, I send my kids to college so they can learn, not so that they can burn buildings and trash lawns, right? And so on and so forth. When we put pronouns after names and say she, her, as opposed to saying, you know what, if I call you by the wrong pronoun, call me out, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. But stop with the virtue signaling and just speak to people like they're normal.
Yeah, the reason we lost is because actually, we won't ever know why we lost if left alone, because there is no process for transparency or accountability in the party, which is one of the issues that I've been raising for years now, is that they spend billions, literally billions, and there's no reporting mechanism to the DNC membership. So the only way people have of having accountability is to sort of leak their stories or their complaints to the press. They will find everybody in the world to blame, but they'll never blame themselves. And that's the problem, is that year in, year out, we hire the same consultants. The DNC becomes a fundraising vehicle to raise billions of dollars for consultants who use it to raise more money and to spend money on TV ads, which they make a bundle off of. They never lose an election, these consultants, because they always pocket their money and go and then come back 2 years later and run some more campaigns.
And for people that don't know, I don't know if you have an exact number, but all the fundraising emails people get from the DNC, the Democratic Party, how much of that estimated goes to these consultants?
All of it, actually. Whatever's raised, very little actually goes to operations in the party. Maybe, maybe 100 million or so overall. 240 million on TV ads, 110 million spent on these internet, the text message fundraising. No report back to us on how much money they made on that, but I'm sure that it doesn't equal the amount that they spent. The point is that what's happened is that the party for decades now has been a consultant-driven operation. There is no governing body. The money gets raised. The money goes to a small group of consultant organizations who perform all the tasks. And when I was chair of the resolutions committee, for example, a resolution would come up, and I would be told, "You can't introduce that." And I'd say, "Why?" And I'd say a member presented it, and they said, "Yeah, but they say that we can't do it." And who are the they? You never find out who they are, but they are decidedly unwoke. They are decidedly cautious. They are decidedly out of touch with where the electorate is. They're interested in making their money and leaving. Whether or not they make whether that they produce victory is never an issue, right? It's
Right.
240 million on TV ads with at least a 20% kickback on placement. Means they, those who made the ads and placed the ads made a cool 48 million at least. And what was the effectiveness of the ads? What are the effectiveness of those? I'm on my hands and knees begging you at this last hour to send me $3 for my campaign. We'll never know. So yeah, the issue is not wokeness. The issue is a lack of accountability as to the decisions that get made and the way the party operates, like I said, as a fundraising vehicle to hire consultants, and not as a actual political organization, and not as one that has a governing body. And so we make the same mistakes year in, year out. But at the end, because they're not going to blame themselves for bad structural decisions, they'll find everybody else in the world to blame. And usually the weakest target, the easiest target, is the one that has the least influence, and that's the left.
Let me ask you about this, because like in sports, for example, if you repeatedly lose, particularly to like an underdog or a team that's not as good, you tend to lose your jobs, get traded, not be re-signed. But I've been covering this for 10 years, and it's the same people, the same consultants that routinely not only keep their jobs, but get promoted or get fatter contracts.
Yep.
So they lost in 2016 to Trump. 2020, I mean, they maybe took the wrong lessons, but Biden did not barely won. I mean, in the Electoral College. Are a lot of these same people that are losing continually being recycled back?
Sure. And it's been about 20 years for this particular set of them. And they fail up. They don't. I'm glad you used the sports analogy, because I use it all the time. And that is, if we took their records like batting averages, they wouldn't even be in the minor leagues right now. And never questions asked, never why'd you do it, what mistake did you look. The DNC bylaws, when I was on the Unity Reform Commission, had a specific requirement that annually we review the budget and the results of expenditures and staff. In the 32 years I was on the DNC, never did we have, never saw the budget, never evaluated the expenditures and the effectiveness of them as we're required to do. And when I raised it as an issue for the Unity Reform Commission and asked specifically that we have a financial oversight committee, not only did they take that out of the recommendations that we issued and not allow a vote on it, but then they rewrote the bylaws, taking that whole section out so that they don't want accountability or transparency, and that's very, I think, very disturbing here. And so, they fail.
Sounds like a racket to me.
That's a way to put it. Yeah, I mean, look, and here's the thing too: is that understand that Ben Rhodes talks about the foreign policy blob, and that's the people who've been in foreign policy circles for decades have lost touch with the world as it's changed since the Iraq War. We're no longer the city on the hill. We're no longer the defender of human rights. We're no longer viewed as the country that supports international law, blah, blah, blah. Instead, we're a rogue nation that supports countries that violate human rights and have thrown out all of the architecture of diplomacy that was built after World War II. But the foreign policy blob doesn't get it. And so they still continue to advocate for war and for, today, Biden sending a letter, the White House sending a letter to senators saying if you call for enforcement of U.S. laws and stop arming Israel, you're aiding Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. I mean, that's the line the White House is taking, completely out of touch with the world as the world sees us. Well, the consultancy blob is the same. They are the same cast of characters over the last 20-something years who've been doing this. They are unimaginative. They have the same formulaic approach to politics that they had 20-something years ago. And they're out of touch with a changing electorate. And yet, you know, when I've been reading these articles in the paper that there needs to be an autopsy and we need to examine what happens, who are the people that get mentioned? It's the very people who are the problem who get mentioned to do the autopsy, which is sort of like asking the arsonist to figure out who started the fire.
Right.
They're not going to blame themselves. They're going to blame the woke and end up taking the side of Nancy Mace or Marjorie Taylor Greene because they just don't get it.
Right. And let me ask you, because after every election loss, not just presidential, you know, Congress, I keep hearing from Democrats, to a certain extent, Republicans do the same thing. It's not that the meal is rotten. It's the delivery. You know, it's the aesthetics. It's the messaging. But it seems pretty clear to me. I mean, I went around the country. We did 3 states in 10 days. It wasn't the message. It was the policies. And I'm hearing a lot of people are kind of just done with both parties.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah, because it appears that the corporation is running both parties. So I don't know. But I do feel that under the Democrats, we are seeing more or less representative.
It's not going to get any better under the Democrats
It hasn't
because we've been
gotten
had
any
them
better.
for, I know, 20-something years. And I haven't seen anything. I lived through right to work. I done lived through the riot. I done lived through all of the police brutality in the city of Detroit. And all of this was under Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so.
So are you feeling for yourself that you would consider Trump, or?
I would consider it.
And if you have the choice of the lesser evil, to me, evil is evil.
I mean, Biden's highest approval rating was after the COVID relief bill because they actually provided relief to people. The only problem was they only provided 1-year policies that expired. Biden ran on a $15 minimum wage, quickly abandoned it. He ran on a public option, never uttered the phrase again. I mean, I could go on and on. So despite some good things he did, on a larger picture, I mean, you have a 50-year large, I call it a bank robbery, large redistribution of wealth upwards. And it seems that bubble has popped with Trump over the last couple of years, even though he's not doing anything for those frustrated people. Do these people at the DNC really think it's a messaging problem, or do they understand that the policies itself are not bold enough to meet the moment?
Like I said, unimaginative and unaccountable. So they don't get the fact that they're out of touch. They don't get the fact that we just don't have a message that can be the message of a majoritarian party. Look, 2014, after the election, in the 3 cycles, the 10, 12, and 14 elections, we lost a combined total of 1,400 state and federal positions. Lost control of legislatures in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. Working class people were being gutted. Everything from unions being threatened to public safety and workplace safety issues were being dropped. And so we go to the meeting of the executive committee. Party pollster comes in and he says, "Why is everybody so glum? We actually kept the Obama coalition together. We won the black vote. We won the Latino vote. We won the Asian vote. We won the youth vote. We won the professional women, educated women vote. We just didn't win enough of them. So we've got to double down and put more resources." I chair the Ethnic Council, which is the created by Clinton, and it was the Irish, Polish, Italian, Eastern, Central European, and the Greeks and the Arabs. Everybody that didn't have a desk before, because there were affirmative action desks, but nobody for this big group in the middle. So, and they had been the people who'd been the backbone of the Democratic Party. That's who labor was, and the miners were in Pennsylvania and in Ohio, and that's who the factory workers were in Michigan. And we'd lost them. So Clinton wanted to bring them back, so we created the Ethnic Council. I raised my hand and I said, I said, you mentioned all these groups, but what about white working class? His response was rather contemptuous. He said, we're not throwing money away, wasting it on people who are never going to vote for us. To which I responded, they're not voting for us because we have abandoned them. We stopped talking to them. And I said, the problem is that this is not an either or issue. This is not do this coalition versus that. We have to have a message that reaches both white working class and the working class, Black, Latino, Asian populations, young people generally across the board, et cetera. They would have none of it at all. So we stopped talking to those folks and lost them decisively. I remember being in Pennsylvania 2 elections ago, and remember, guy running for Congress came, TV ad, had a flannel shirt, checkered flannel shirt on, jeans, came walking toward the camera saying, my mom and dad were union leaders, and I grew up a Democrat. But let's face it, Democrats don't care about us anymore. That's why I'm running as a Republican, because I care about working people. And I thought to myself, we don't have that should be our message. That's the message that we ran on for years. That's what Jesse Jackson ran on. That's what Bernie Sanders ran on. And here we are in a position where we've got a Lindsey Graham saying, let's face it, we've become the party of the working class, and Democrats are the party of elites. That was our fault. We stopped talking to working class people. We don't even use the word working class. Smacks of Marxism. We won't do that. Instead, we call them everything we can, from deplorable to garbage to the term of art and polling is the non-college educated whites. Nobody's got a bumper sticker that says non-college educated white and I vote. Do you think
it would be easier to talk to them if you, when you have the power, pass major, like Biden technically could have passed the $15 minimum wage through that COVID relief bill. He just said, well, the parliamentarian says no. That's something you could put on a bumper sticker and message.
2 things. One is the message has to be right, and 2, the way you deliver the message has to be right. So, for example, there was a bit of a bump for Harris after the debate when she talked about 800,000 Polish Americans in Pennsylvania caring about what happens in Eastern Europe. That was the last time it got mentioned. The Polish American community got really excited. She's talking about us. I mean, leave it to Trump to end up with people in the audience carrying signs and his crowds carrying signs. I'm a Hungarian American for Trump, or I'm a Ukrainian American for Trump. He had contempt for all of those people, all of them. And yet they did outreach directly to them, and we did not. I wanted to get a small budget to do advertising in ethnic media about why Democrats are better. They had no money for it. Where'd the money go? $1 billion, and plus being in the hole, a couple $100 million. The priorities were all wrong. The messaging was all wrong. And the fact that they didn't go to people was all wrong. Why in my community does Donald Trump go and meet with Muslims, go and meet with Arab Americans twice, and Kamala Harris didn't go once? That's not on her. That's on a campaign that had no sense of the need to even go and talk to different communities and meet them on their own turf. Would she have taken heat? Of course she might have taken heat, but it's a sign of respect at least to go to them. But the who drive this operation, like I said, have no interest in being bold or being in taking the initiative. They're cautious. They want to make their money and run. And the TV ads and the online ads and the doing everything virtually to them was a whole lot easier path to follow. And getting a crowd of 10,000 people is a whole lot easier and better to manage than meeting with 30 or 40 and trying to win people over who could end up conveying your message.
Let me ask you a question on that, pivoting, because you're a very prominent Arab American, president of the Arab American Institute. And, you know, I'm Jewish, but I don't think it's anti-Semitic to say some of the top donors in the Democratic Party are Jewish and ardently Zionist. That's just a fact. Haim Saban, net worth of $3 billion, one of the biggest funders of the party forever and ever, from the Clintons to Obama and down. He has notoriously reprimanded. He even sent a stern letter to Biden a couple months ago when Biden paused weapons to Israel. You we don't know ultimately what happened, but it seems that if you have a lot of those donors in the, Sky VIP boxes at the DNC, maybe that has something to do with not allowing Palestinians to speak at the DNC. When you have a massive protests for over a year going on, which we've been covering, and the Democratic Party basically looks the other way, keeps providing a blank check, how much of this is just Biden and he's going to protect Israel, and how much of it was donor influence, that whether they're Jewish or just very pro-Israel, the Democratic Party is focusing on the donors rather than the moral and smart political position?
For obvious reasons, I'm not going to get into the religion or ethnicity of donors, period.
Okay.
But big donors generally do end up driving the engine. And not on so much on specific issues as on they become the audience that the consultants end up addressing. They're not talking to, former steel workers in Pennsylvania. What do you need? They're not talking to miners who are out of work in West Virginia. They're not talking to working class families who for whom Obamacare, as helpful as it was, is not meeting their everyday needs for expanded coverage and care. They're not speaking to them. They're going to Upper West Side Manhattan and sipping cocktails with folks who can give them 100,000 or 200,000 or whatever. It's the audience that they speak to and the culture that they end up becoming a part of, and that's where victory and loss is measured. How much money did we raise, and how much money have we gotten for the various consulting groups doing the work? I do think that, for example, on the speaker at the convention issue, I don't think there were 5 votes that would have been lost if they'd had a Palestinian American on the stage. I don't think so at all. I don't think that they would have lost any money if they'd had a Palestinian American speaker on the stage. After all, the Jewish Forward, which is not a liberal paper, used to be very progressive, but today it's more centrist and sometimes even right-wing leaning. They editorialized there should have been one. A number of American Jewish organizations argued the Israeli American family that spoke at the convention said that there should have been a Palestinian American family speaker. Right. Why wasn't there? I don't think it had anything to do with donors. I think it had to do with the lack of imagination and the risk averseness of the consultants for whom this was a new idea. Somebody said, when was the last Palestinian speaker at a Democratic convention? I said, there's never been a Palestinian American speaker at a Democratic convention. Actually, the last Arab American speaker, and actually the only Arab American speaker at a Democratic convention, was me in 1984 and 1988. 84 when I nominated Jesse Jackson for president, and 88 when I introduced our platform plank on 2 states. That's the last time a person of Arab descent spoke at a convention. Why? Because unless there was Jesse there forcing their hand, it wasn't going to happen. Yeah. Because they are cautious, risk averse, and they freaked. They panicked. The thought of a Palestinian American, the woman in particular who was in question, was a longtime donor to Kamala Harris from when she was district attorney in San Francisco, is a friend of hers. She talks to her frequently. She was willing to do a speech that they would have helped script. She'd lost 100 family members in Gaza at that point. And she just wanted to tell her story, just like the Israeli Americans did. She wasn't going to make a political point. She just wanted to humanize the story of Palestinians. I can't imagine that any donor would have said, I'm pulling my money out because you let this woman speak, or any vote would have been lost. It was simply risk averse, overly cautious, unimaginative consultants who say, well, we can't do that. We've never done that before. And we've got this message.
And this was a friend. This was a friend of Vice President Harris? Wow.
Yeah. And I believe she had nothing to do with the decision at all, which is the problem with these things, is that the candidate is busy doing, where am I going and what am I doing and how am I saying whatever. These decisions get made by the consultants, and the consultants steer you bad. They ought to be bounced, But instead, like I said, they come back another round and they'll make their money in 2 years.
Real quick, I know you got to go. The audience might say, James, you've been doing this for 32 years. Is it time maybe to, take your young buck status and maybe try to start a third party with some others?
Nope. I'm Sisyphus. Sometimes I got people say I'm Charlie Brown in the football, but I think more Sisyphus, rolling that stone, knowing it's going to roll back down. But frankly, what else am I going to do? I mean, the reality here is that this party has to change. This party has to move. And I believe that the pieces are there to make it change and make it move. And I'm just not willing to give up and walk away from it because at my age, I'm 79, going to be 80 next year. Not interested in a venture that will take 20 years. I think the Democratic Party can be forcibly changed from within in short order. And I'll tell you, I'm committed to doing it. I've got a lot of friends who are saying, go ahead, we want to do this. And so I'm going to run for vice chair and raise these issues of accountability and transparency. And I know they're going to go bullshitty on it. They're already, pro-Palestinian, whatever. I mean, they'll use every racist tool they can to bait me and smear me. But look, I've still got some years ahead of me, and I'm willing to use them to fight for reform in the party. And I'm going to continue to do it.
Thank you, sir, for taking the time. I appreciate it. President of the Arab American Institute, James Zogby. Thank you.